Hi, my name is Zaakir Tameez. I'm a graduate of Yale Law School. I'm a recent author, and I'm a TAP mentee from 2022 to 2023. I never planned on writing a book. It started in law school when I was reading the brief that Thurgood Marshall and the NAACP filed in Brown versus Board for constitutional law. And as I'm reading Marshall's brief, I stumble on Charles Sumner, who is cited not once, not twice, but more than 40 times in the document. And what I realized is that more than 100 years before Brown versus Board, Charles Sumner collaborated on the first interracial legal team in American history on an appellate case to integrate the schools of Boston. And I was so startled by this story, and I felt like it needed to be told again. I think we live in a moment where we as Americans are looking for heroes in our past that we can respect and value. Most of us grew up with narratives about founding fathers, many of whom were slaveholders, for example, and we have struggled with finding Americans in our past, particularly Americans in our constitutional history, that we can respect and admire. And I found in Charles Sumner a man who played a key role in the 13th Amendment and the 14th Amendment and the 15th Amendment to be akin to a second generation of founding fathers who did believe in a multiracial, multi-ethnic, multi-religious democracy, who played a key role in the legal reforms that have led to what we have today. Charles Sumner tried to make the movement his whole life. He would spend 12, 13, 14 hours a day preparing for his Senate remarks, engaging in lobbying efforts, meeting with activists, coordinating plans. It had a pretty negative impact on his health, and he never wanted to take a step back from the struggle. Luckily, he had a few friends who forced him to take a step back from time to time so that he could refresh and rejuvenate. After the Civil War, while many abolitionists were celebrating, Charles Sumner was thinking strategically about what legislative reforms needed to take place to secure freedom for African Americans in the long run. Even if they had freedom today, he was concerned of what he needed to do to make sure they had freedom tomorrow. And his vehicle for securing that freedom was using the law. He said, lawgivers are among the greatest and most godlike characters. They are builders of human society. They are reformers of nations. As we think about constitutional law, civil rights law, immigration law, we are seeing how laws can be used both to help and to harm. We are seeing that in real time. And what we must reflect on is how do we prepare for the future, and how do we write legislation and interpret law in a manner that can secure freedom for all and for everyone and in the long run, rather than just looking for short-term victories. We have always lived in a world in which most judges, most lawyers are unrepresentative of society writ large. We still face this challenge today, and it's not unlike what it was in the 1950s or the 1920s or the 1850s. And yet, we have been able to secure legal change in the past, and we can continue to secure legal change in the future. I think it's really important in this respect not to give up. Charles Sumner played a key role in founding Howard Law School, the first law school in America open to blacks and to women. And what's amazing is that he would spend all this time with Howard Law students. They would come to his home. It was normal for them to be at his home. And he would chat with them. He would guide their careers. They, in turn, would advise him on policy matters. This is what he believed was necessary to secure the gains of Reconstruction for the long term, was mentoring young people so that they could continue on the fight after he was gone. When Charles Sumner moved into his first house in 1871, he decides to have his secretary come live with him. His secretary is a dropout of Harvard Law School. And when the secretary arrives, he tells this young man that when he was young, he would stay at the home of Chancellor James Kent, this famous American jurist often called the American Blackstone. And then he tells his secretary that when Kent was young, Kent would stay at the Poughkeepsie home of Alexander Hamilton, the founding father. In other words, he's telling this young Harvard Law School dropout, no pressure. I was mentored by Kent, Kent was mentored by Hamilton, and now I'm mentoring you. This young man grows up to be Moorfield's story. He goes on to be the first president of the NAACP. And you have this amazing chain from Alexander Hamilton to Chancellor Kent to Charles Sumner to the founding president of the NAACP. And we can only imagine if we bring that chain downwards from the NAACP in the early 1900s to other civil rights organizations by the 1950s and 70s to organizations like the Appellate Project today, which are legal organizations devoted to making our systems better, devoted to making them more inclusive in the same manner as Sumner intended, as what he learned from Kent and then from Hamilton before him. And there's one striking moment where Charles Sumner is debating the constitutionality of what becomes the Civil Rights Act of 1875, and many of his colleagues are opposed to the bill. And what Sumner does is he starts to read letters from George Downing, the chef, on the Senate floor, where Downing is point by point breaking down the arguments of anti-civil rights figures in the Senate. And Sumner says that Downing has the Constitution better than some of his own colleagues. That's real allyship, is when someone in a position of power spends serious time with, but also learning from, individuals who come from that marginalized background, and then takes that learning and uses it with their privilege and attributes it back to the person that they're learning from. Even as we have this privilege as lawyers, for example, we have to learn from ordinary people, and we have to cite their example and cite their lessons in our advocacy, and never forget that we are just allies in this movement. We are not the leaders of the movement. I think for most, lawyers in privileged places are interested in creating a better profession for everyone. They just may not have the tools to do so, and they may not have the people who can help them do so. And organizations like TAP bring young people from these perspectives into conversation with lawyers in positions of power. And those conversations, I think, are and will continue to lead to change, because they enable people in positions of power to interact with young people from marginalized backgrounds in a very powerful, meaningful, intimate manner. Mentorship can be revolutionary. Mentors in the past have helped to train generations of leaders to transform our legal profession. So for example, we all hear about Thurgood Marshall, who helped to argue for the integration of American public schools, who was one of the key civil rights lawyers of the 20th century, who became a justice on the US Supreme Court. Thurgood Marshall had mentors. One of his mentors was Charles Hamilton Houston, a professor at Howard Law School, who is not often remembered today. Charles Hamilton Houston met Thurgood Marshall when he was a young student and told him that he was going to help turn Marshall into a leading civil rights lawyer. And he trained Marshall day in and day out for years and years until Marshall was ready to argue that case before the Supreme Court. If there was no Houston, there would have been no Marshall. And I wonder, who are the Charles Hamilton Houstons among the TAP mentor collective today? We may not know, but one day some of these TAP mentees are going to change the world, and it's going to be because of the TAP mentors who trained them when they were young. TAP widened the doors for me for opportunities, and correspondingly, it expanded my own. I never dreamed that I could have been an author, or that I could have written a book as fat as the one I have here. I learned how to do it in law school and with the mentorship of my TAP mentors. So for example, my TAP mentors helped me secure all 3 of my internships during law school. One of those internships, I helped to write a Supreme Court amicus brief in which I was using historical material to advance the argument. And that taught me the power of history in legal interpretation. And one of my TAP mentors, who serves in a Solicitor General's office, uses history in his own briefs, and he explained that to me. And so it's in many ways because of my TAP mentors that I was set on this journey, and they were the ones that I told about this book project, who helped me navigate classes and internships while working on this book, who encouraged me down this path, who gave me advice, didn't stop me, but also kind of kept me on course to at least graduate and get employed, etc. And so I'm so grateful for TAP, because if it wasn't for TAP, I don't know if this book project ever would have come about.